Hey friend, welcome back to the Created Worthy podcast. I am your host and fellow worthy warrior, Danielle Damrell. On this show, we are creating space for genuine connection by unifying women of all ages, backgrounds, and experiences. So grab your favorite drink and get ready to listen as we take a deep dive into our stories, making sure to honor and protect them in the process. We will also uncover the threads of creative processing that have already played a part in each of our lives. When we know how to utilize this as a skill, we can continue growing into the joy-filled, triumphant women we are created to be. You are created worthy. Wee-oo. So that was my attempt at a siren noise this season. If you weren't here last season, then you probably just think I'm a weirdo, and I can't even say that you're wrong. But nonetheless, here we are, and the reason I do those is because some episodes could be especially triggering. In this episode, we talk about subjects such as marital abuse, rape, suicide, and a variety of other sensitive subjects. So, if you think that there is any chance that you may get triggered, then I will encourage you to prioritize your mental and emotional well-being and just opt out of listening to this episode. It's okay. No hard feelings. Protect your peace. See, I told you I am weird. I can't help it. I was born this way. Hello. Welcome to the Created Worthy podcast. Today, I am joined by Leah Kahn, and Leah is a beautiful soul through and through. She's a mom of 3 girls and is actively working to dismantle generational trauma by loving her daughters gently and strongly all at the same time. Coming from a past riddled with marital abuse, mental health crises, a suicide attempt in February of 2020, all of these experiences have shaped the way that she now interacts with the world and those around her. Professionally, Leah is a freelance writer, an expert photo editor, and she's targeting creative markets all throughout the United States. Leah is passionate about psychology, Enneagram, which I'm so excited to talk to you about, and mental health support. She dreams of one day opening a home for women leaving inpatient care or abusive situations, writing books, and living on a homestead with her partner, Zach, and their 3 girls. Leah, thank you so much for being here today. I am so excited to talk about your story because the little bit that I already know about it, it's so powerful, and you've already inspired me for like the last few years that I've known you. And yeah, the fact that you're here on Created Worthy is like such a huge blessing. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is the first time like outside of personal interactions I've ever like talked about my story and my past with anyone. Like it's always just been like in conversation. So I'm really excited to be here, and also like the nerves.
I know.
Jitters. Is that
I know.
normal?
It's totally normal. So the second that you turn on the microphone, and this time we're like recording on a camera, it's like it's a whole different sphere. You know, like it just feels the vibe is different. And so you have to get like used to it. But when you're doing one-off things like this, I can't anticipate that you're going to just be super used to having a camera in your face. And well, you're a photographer.
I'm behind it.
But you're behind it. Exactly. Not in front of your face.
It's in my face in a different way.
Totally different way. And then a microphone, you know, like it's your voice that's going out to the world. So totally normal. I was like, what's that word for there to be some nerves?
We don't know it that well. It's fine.
I know. It's so hard. Words are hard. Well, I would love for you to just start with telling us a little bit about your childhood and how you grew up and where you're from and all that good stuff.
Yeah. I am one of 6 kids. I've got 4 sisters and 1 brother. And I fall right smack in the middle of them. So I used to tell people, they would ask like, are you like older, younger, middle kid? And I would always say, I'm the middle of my family. Because if you take just the 6 kids, I'm one of the middles. But if you take my whole family, I'm still one of the middles.
And I was middle.
I was the middle because there were always two middle kids, and I needed something to make me special. And it's something I've talked with my family a lot about, like as I've gone through therapy, but just the difference in my experience in my family. Like I always could see the special something about the rest of my family, but always felt like there wasn't anything special about me. And just how, like, that was no fault of my family's. It was just who I was. I heard something really interesting the other day where someone was asking, I don't even know what his title was, but she was like, what do you have to say about, you know, like kids who are completely different, even though they're raised in the same family by the same parents? And he said, no two kids have the same parents, because
that is so true.
Every child's temperament, you know, requires a different treatment from their parents. And so their parents are different to them than they are any other child in the family. And I think a lot of those feelings were kind of the foundation of, I'm an Enneagram 4. Surprise.
And so am I.
I know. We're
oh
so emotional and amazing.
That's right. We're creative. We're emotional.
Yes, we're romantic and dramatic
all the
sometimes.
Only in the good ways, though.
Yes, in the good ways, which that was a big thing. Drama was like a hot button word for me for a long time, because everyone told me I was dramatic. And I was like, I'm not being dramatic. I have these big emotions, and I didn't know what to do with them. Raised in a conservative Christian home. My dad is one of 9 kids. My mom is an only child. And so, like, dramatically different backgrounds. They also started really young. They were 15 and 17 when they got pregnant with my oldest sister. So by the time they had their 6th and final child, my mom was 26 and my dad was 28.
Whoa. And so they had all of you guys in their 20s?
In their teens and 20s.
Teens and 20s.
Yeah.
Oh,
so my mom
goodness.
had me 3 days before she turned 19. Which, like, in hindsight, makes so much sense of the things I remember as a child. You know, like, my dad was a kid.
They were growing up with you.
Those things have happened.
Wow.
But growing up in that environment, you know, like, I don't know about you, Danielle, but growing up in a conservative Christian home, going to a conservative Christian church, you don't have emotions. You're not supposed to. Mm-hmm. Those are bad. They're from the devil.
Yeah.
And so I spent a lot of my childhood just trying to figure out how to bury everything that I was feeling and not really understanding it. I remember having anxiety attacks when I was 12, and I talked to my parents about it, and my dad was like, "You're just doing this for attention." You know, he's like, that's that, or you sinned, and this is your punishment. And again, we've had so many amazing conversations about this now. The growth that my family has experienced is amazing. But a lot of it was just like, oh, like, I'm wrong. I'm bad for this. And so I just ignored mental health for a long time, which I think definitely played a huge role in life decisions.
That's also like
forward.
A conservative Christian thing to ignore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, just not having an understanding of it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are so scared of, you know, the things that they hear about, you know, the demonic oppression and possession and all those things. And they're like, obviously anything that's outside of our control has to have a name and an answer so that we're not in trouble for it. And so I think a lot of churches are just like, no, we just, like, that's not real.
Right.
Because you're not possessed by a demon. So clearly there's nothing outside of your control happening.
But also, who are they to judge that?
Yeah, not someone who has experienced
you know?
it, or at the very least acknowledged the validity of it in their own lives.
Yes, exactly.
Which was really hard. You know, again, like, having as many siblings as I did, growing up in that conservative environment, I didn't understand what was going on in my own head for a really long time. And it wasn't until right after I got married the first time in 2015 that I finally went on an antidepressant, and I was like, man, this is insane. I was like, I had no idea that my energy levels and my mind frame and all of that was like something I could have control over. Like, I just thought that was who I was. And then, you know, I got pregnant pretty quickly after. And so there was the whole conversation of, do I continue this? Do I not? And it was this whole song and dance of figuring out how to handle my own mental health with, you know, outside circumstances taking place as well that impacted a lot of those things. Yeah. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I know that you mentioned a little bit your first marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I know that that's been something that you've been trudging through the waters of for now many years, like healing and all of that. But do you want to talk to us a little bit about how that relationship started and what happened in it?
Yeah. So again, growing up, I kind of always struggled with accepting myself, and so then feeling not accepted by other people. And so I never dated anyone until I think I was 18 when my first husband and I started dating. And that was like kind of its own thing. I joke like it was, I don't know if you have this at all where like there's patterns in your life and you're like, I don't understand why this happens.
Patterns.
My pattern as a teenager was that boys would tell me they liked me. One boy at a time would say, I like you. And then I'd be like, oh, well, I like you too. Yeah. So that's really cool. And then I think the longest it went was 2 weeks before they were like, I changed my mind. I don't like you anymore. And that was my pattern. And awesome. Funnily enough, my husband now, Zach, he was one of those boys when I was a teenager.
Are you serious?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Said he liked me and then changed his mind and moved to Texas. But we have talked about how that has brought a lot of things that are very important in our life to us and kind of help our relationship be what it is today. But so that was my pattern where guys just, they liked me and then they didn't like me. And it was this roller coaster. It was confusing. And my first husband was also one of those boys where I met him. I went to an apologetics summer camp in Manitou Springs called Summit. Okay. And one of my good friends, who I think you also know, Joyce.
Yes.
She was going to CCU. She had met this really cool guy. She was like, I think you guys would be perfect for each other. So they came up to visit me on your Sundays you had off in between your 2 weeks. So she brought up this whole gaggle of CCU Salt crew. Church people, and I met my first husband for the first time, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's amazing. He's so sweet. The following week we all went swing dancing together. He asked for my number. We started talking every day. And, we would send each other songs, and he would talk about the church plant he was a part of and what he was studying and kind of what he wanted in life. And then about 2 weeks later, he was like, hey, can I call you? And I was like, sure, like, for sure. Like, he called me and he said, I just don't have time for a relationship right now. And I was like, okay, like, that's fine. I understand. Like, I was heartbroken, but if you don't have time, you don't have time. And that was that. We would see each other every once in a while. My best friend at the time was dating, his roommate. So like we were around, but, I was 17 at the time, turned 18 halfway through, had my own, life happening and just was like, like he's not interested. Obviously I'd seen that through social media. He was hanging out with other girls. Like it was not a time thing. It was an availability and effort that was involved. Because again, conservative Christian family, I wasn't allowed to date till I was 18. My parents were intimidating. It was a lot of work to put in. And so that was in the fall of 2013, spring of 2014. He reaches out to me. I can still see exactly where I was when I got the text from him. And he just asked what was up. We started talking every day again. And then he and I hung out. And on the way home, I just said, hey, so what are you doing? And he was like, well, I was trying to figure out when to have the conversation that I guess we're going to have right now. And I said, yeah, because if this is last year all over again and you're not going to have time in the fall, then you don't have time now.
Yeah.
Like I'm not interested in like this when you're free sort of a thing. And he was like, well, no, I really like you. I want to date you. And so we started dating. We started dating in, I think it was June of 2014. We were engaged New Year's, like at New Year's, 2014, 2015. I never know like which year to say. And then we were married in August of 2015. Okay.
Oh my goodness. So pretty quickly.
Pretty quick. And we had our first daughter, July of 2016. So it was like this super
bing, bang,
quick.
boom.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I mean, people joke. A Kaufman is my maiden name, and so people that know us are like, the Kaufmans, they're fertile myrtles, like gotta have their babies and do everything by the book, and the conservative Christian thing. And so it was a pretty quick thing in hindsight. Like, as a mother, I absolutely wouldn't have encouraged that kind of a timeline, which I realize I don't really have grounds to speak on because my husband and I, Zach, like, our relationship was also super quick.
That's okay. We got engaged and then married 2 months later, so there's no judgment here.
Yeah. Well, and Zach and I, like, it was this whole, I call it like my Gideon moment, where like I had a dream where God told me I was going to marry him, and I argued and I said absolutely not. And in the course of the dream, I basically said, you know what, God, if you want me to believe this, here's what Zach needs to say to me. Gave him like a super intense, vulnerable, very personal script. And about a month later, Zach said that to me, like I was not even hoping for that. And I said, God, all right, so this is what you have for us.
Yeah.
And we have yet to feel like that's not true.
Wow. So can you bring us back to what you walked through with your first husband? So to summarize a little bit of what you were talking about, you had 2 children in 18 months or within?
No, I had 2 children in 2.5 years.
Okay, 2.5 years.
July of 2016, November of 2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were married to this man who, from the beginning, seemed a little bit uncertain about what he wanted, but ultimately said that he wanted you.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Yeah. So a lot of people ask me, like, when they kind of know like the end of the story, they're like, did you ever see anything that indicated what would take place?
Yeah.
And hindsight is 2020. So whether it was real or I'm grasping at straws of what I think would be there, there was definitely a lot of manipulation kind of right up front in our relationship. And again, like, if that happened after the fact, I absolutely would notice it, say something about it, not do anything with that person. But I, again, had never been in a relationship before, had never dated anyone. And I didn't really know how that went. Even my parents, being what they were, they raised us with the intention that we would not get pregnant at 15. And none of us did. But we didn't really learn a lot of other useful life skills with that. And so kind of from the beginning, there was a lot of physical manipulation that took place in my relationship. I was one of those conservative Christian girls who was like, I'm not going to kiss anyone until I get married. And, I was so like, I had my purity ring, and I, had all my grand plans for what was going to happen. And one of the first intense conversations I had after I started dating my first husband was him coming to me and asking me to pray about changing that decision. Because
really,
he's
a pusher.
He was
a boundary pusher.
He was of the opinion that me doing that removed his God-given role of being the leader in our relationship.
Oh my gosh.
And so I took time, I prayed about it, and decided, I need to trust you as the godly male leader in my life. And within an hour of sharing that with him, he had kissed me, which I was ecstatic about at the time. I'd never kissed anyone before. Of course, I'm ecstatic about it. But just as a relationship went on, there were these situations where I would notice things that I was uncomfortable with, and I'd say something, and it was, well, look at where you were raised. You don't understand these things. You haven't even been around alcohol. How can you know that I'm an alcoholic? Like, all of these things where I was gaslit.
So
and
everything, like, all of the concerns that you brought up were just immediately like kaput.
Yeah.
Which I do have to say, like, we totally relate on this aspect. My first real relationship was also at 18 years old with somebody who was a pusher.
Yeah.
And like, I had tried to set those boundaries, even though I actually didn't grow up in a conservative Christian home. I didn't grow up in a Christian home at all. But I started in Christian school in 8th grade, and I went to Catholic school beforehand. So I was around a lot of conservative families. Exactly. And so for me, I was like, I just wanted to feel valued. and seen and loved and respected more than anything else. I just wanted to feel like respected. So I didn't set the no kissing rule, but I did say I don't want to have sex.
Right.
And everything that you were just saying as far as like his God-given right and like let's unpack that whole male domineering part of Christian men who sometimes, and it's not everyone, like granted we're both married to incredible Christian men at this point, so they are out there, but when you're vulnerable, you're only 18 years old and you're like, I'm gonna set this boundary because I know that it feels good, and then somebody tells you no, like let's push it, like let's do something to see if we really love each other, right? And like that whole thing is a lie from the pit of hell, and it's a tactic of the enemy that so many of us get caught up in. And I just feel for you, because as you were saying that, I was like, oh man, different stories, of course, right?
But very similar.
Yeah, like I feel it in my heart. Like I remember being like, I was trying to do something that would make me feel respected and honored, and then somehow I was manipulated into thinking that was wrong. Like that's not how you do relationship.
Well, and I've talked about this a lot because I initially separated from my first husband in 2018. I was, done. I had tried all of the things. Nothing was changing. And everyone recommended the book Love and Respect to me. To this day, I would love to chuck it at the author's head. Like, I'm sorry, but I just like that does not fix everything. You can't just respect your husband into loving you. If they don't love you, they don't love you. It's a choice that they have to do, and they're not just going to do it because they're respected, especially if they are manipulative, narcissistic men. Not just men, anyone, manipulative and narcissistic humans who realize you're doing everything I want. They don't have to do anything for us if we're already doing everything they want. And that's like, I mean, that's the downward spiral, if you will, is you're pushed into believing that like, I just have to do this, and I just have to do this, and I just have to do this, and then
it'll get better.
And they'll change and they'll love me, and I'll be enough for them, which was a common theme of my younger years. I've, since unpacked, realizing like that translated into my first marriage was just wanting to be enough. Wanting to be what someone wanted. And, again, not that my parents didn't want me, but I wanted to be wanted in a way that they didn't understand at the time. And so just, being with him, it was the downward spiral where things started very, vanilla, if you will. Right. It was drinking when he first got home from work before he would sit down and talk with me. It was, this, that, and the other. He'd rather spend time with his friends. He'd rather do this. And it was talking down to me. It was the gaslighting. It was the, well, you're not taking care of the house, so why, I don't even want to be here, like those sorts of things. And then a big thing that I actually stood for pretty strongly was that when we got married, I wasn't going to go on birth control. I knew that there was a really high chance that it would impact my mental health that was already struggling. I was barely trying to figure that out. I said, I'm not interested in doing that. And he said, okay, well, your family planning method better work because I don't want a kid right now. And I was like, okay.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, a lot of pressure. And I did not understand my body.
Which, sorry to go on a soapbox real fast, but I do think that it's really, really important that men become educated about birth control. Yeah. Because it's not just like that it can affect your mental health, although that is a huge thing. It also affects your body and your hormones. Yeah. All of the
fertility later, like down the road. And even like just from the stance that was important to me, like I've seen the studies when they take women who are not on hormonal birth control and women who are, the women who are on hormonal birth control are 50% more likely to suffer from severe depression or attempt suicide. Like it is a life and death matter. In my opinion. And if women want to make that choice, if that is what they are comfortable with, they have done their research, that's what they want, absolutely, I support that. Yeah. That's your choice. But for any woman who's going to make that choice to make a man happy so that he can raw dog it, like, cool. Thanks, dude. And I'm
Yes,
sorry.
no.
Yeah, like
We keep things real here.
But like I don't care if it feels
Yeah.
different for you. My whole life feels different. That's 3 seconds, bud. 3 seconds at best.
Yeah.
Like at best. And you want my whole life to suffer. But again, like he put that on me. Like, well, your method better work because I don't want a kid yet. And it did not work. I was pregnant within 2 months. With my oldest daughter. And that was like a really big turning point. I wouldn't say that he wasn't excited about it. He, like, that is one thing I will absolutely always give him is that he loves his kids. And I'm very grateful for that. Mm-hmm. But it was a huge shift in our relationship to go from marrying someone you barely know to being married to someone you barely know who is sick as a dog all the time for a reason that you did not want initially. Like, that's pretty intense stuff. And their attitude started changing a lot. The way that they were treating me changed a lot. And at the same time, I was navigating being on antidepressants and struggling if that was wrong for my baby and me. And, you know, because again, like all of the voices and how I was raised, like life was not what I was currently experiencing prior to that point, you know, like it was so different.
And you were so young still.
I was still so young. And like, I think about that, like I was a child. I was a child myself.
I feel that.
Even though I was so sure I was an adult, you know?
Yeah, I know. It's so hard looking back. How old were you?
I was 19 when I got pregnant, 20 when I had her.
Okay.
So.
And I was 19 when I had my daughter. I turned 20 a couple months later.
Yeah.
But yeah, still same age.
Yeah,
like,
just
definitely thought I was older than I was.
That we knew so much.
So much. But then becoming a mom.
Yeah, it changes everything.
It changes everything.
And I definitely like, I think about my children. It's something Zach and I have talked about, you know, like him choosing to go to Texas and, you know, being gone and all that. Like those decisions that were so hurtful in the moment are what gave us Blythe and Jude, our two older daughters, and how beautiful it is. Zach comes from, I love and hate the term, but from a broken home where his parents were divorced when he was 4. Yeah. And so he has like a firsthand understanding of how to love our children in a way that makes sense to them, and the language for going back and forth between houses and you know, having multiple father figures or multiple mother figures in your life. You know, like he's got that language to connect with them on, which is something I'm so grateful for. And again, you know, people ask, would you change anything? And absolutely not, you know.
Like
these are,
you would not
these
have
are
your
my
sweet
life,
babies.
my children. Like there is a reason and a purpose that God has for those children. Right. And so no amount of pain or suffering is worth trading them, you know? And that is, you know, that's something that I don't talk about with a lot of people, but some people do know that so kind of backtracking a little bit. After Blythe was born, you know, things kind of just were what they were. And then when she was 9, I think that would be 9 months, 9 months old. It was the night before my oldest sister's wedding, was when things kind of got really bad with my first husband. And I woke up to him sexually assaulting me. And that continued to happen for the remainder of our marriage up until the night of my suicide attempt. And with that, like, it was just, you know, it was this roller coaster where I was young. I thought I knew the whole world. I had had a baby and I was struggling with my body image and, you know, wanting to be enough for this man, you know, because again, that was a common theme in our relationship. And it reached a point where he wanted nothing to do with me. Like I was buying new lingerie and I was literally starving myself. I can remember the compliments I got from all of, you know, the out of town family that week. Man, Leah, you look so good. You just had a baby. Like, what's your trick? You know, like all those things, which like
so hard because people are trying to be nice, but also like it's don't talk about people's bodies.
Yeah, we don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But it was so hard because I was like, I'm enough for them. Why am I not enough for him? And then to wake up to that was just the ultimate, like, you are not it. You're not it, Leah. You're not enough for him. You're not what he wants. Like, I couldn't make sense of it, but kind of in my head justified it where I was like, if that's how he wants it, then I don't know what to do. And I had talked to him about it and was like, hey, like that made me uncomfortable. He twisted it like, no. In your sleep, you were getting after it and like you were interested. And like, I just assumed that it was okay because you were responding to these things. And like, it took a long time for me to be able to look at it and say, no, that's rape. Like, that's not okay.
Yeah.
And I kind of just sat with it for, for 8 months, I think. And the fall of that year, I started seeing a therapist with my husband. She was a Christian counselor. And I will never forget sitting there with my abusive husband and her asking me why I wouldn't forgive him. She said, that's why you're not moving forward. You won't forgive him, Leah. That's what you guys need. You need forgiveness to enter the group chat. And I was like, you have just given him permission to continue doing things and holding it over my head until I forgive him.
That's disgusting.
Like, she was not trauma informed or trained in hindsight. So I'm sure she does wonderful things for other people. She should not have been seeing a couple of our caliber. And I felt really alone. I wasn't talking to anyone about what was happening. And finally, after talking to a good friend, just about how, like, I didn't feel like therapy was helping, she was like, you could see a different therapist by yourself.
Isn't it so eye-opening when all of a sudden you realize, like, oh, I don't have to stay with somebody who doesn't actually feel like they're helping me to grow and heal.
Yeah.
Like, I can go find somebody else and try something new.
Yeah. So I went through our insurance and I told him, I was like, I'm just having a lot of anxiety and postpartum stuff, and I was like, I think I just want to go see someone by myself, but it shouldn't be the same person we're seeing together. Found a lady who was in network, went and saw her. In hindsight, she was really, really shady.
Great.
But she gave me the language that what he was doing was abuse and it was rape and it was not okay. And she gave me the language for a controlled separation and all of these things that became tools. So this is going into 2018. I've just got my older daughter Blythe at this point. And I've made my whole plan. I'm going to have a 2-month-long controlled separation, 1 month completely apart, 1 month back together. But we need to be in therapy was my requirement. We needed to do those things. And I didn't tell him until, I think, 2 days before that it was going to happen. And I decided it was going to happen on New Year's Day because I didn't want to mess up holidays or anything because, family's coming in from out of town and you're around all of the people. I was like, I don't need to overcomplicate this. But I talked to my parents. They were going to allow me and him intermittently to stay with them so that we weren't moving Blythe back and forth for separate time with each of us. And I just told him, I said, this is non-negotiable. This is what we're doing. We're going to work on things. We're going to figure it out. And he did it. We went to counseling through our church, which did not work out. We were talking about this before. Was really hurtful for me. But in all of that, I opted not to share anything about the sexual side of things with people because you need to respect your husband and you need to keep his reputation good. So we started the separation. We were seeing therapists, and a big piece of advice that I received from multiple churches was that in the midst of this, again, they didn't know, the full extent of everything, but was that I could not or should not withhold any physical part of my relationship from my husband during the separation.
I.e., you should continue having sex with somebody who's raped you.
Mm-hmm. Which they didn't know at that point that was what was going on, but they did tell me that I shouldn't. And so during our separation was actually an instance where he was raping me. I was actually awake at that point, but I got pregnant with my second daughter, Jude, and didn't know yet at the time. So we completed the separation, and the day that it had ended, so it was like our first day post-separation, yesterday we were separated, today we're not, even though it feels weird, it can work that way. He's at work all day and he texts me, hey, some of the guys from work are going to go out, and I'm going to go with them, but I won't stay out late. And I was disappointed,
This is our first time being together after a separation.
And you want to go hang out with your buddies. Like, okay, cool. Like, is what it is. And so finally around 7:30, I've already gotten our older daughter down for bed. He texts me. He's like, hey, I'm going to be on my way in a few minutes. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, see you when you get here. And then it's 8:30 and he's not home. And I'm like, okay, I'll check his location. He's still in downtown Denver. And I'm like, this is weird. But maybe he got caught up or he's trying to get to his car. I don't know. So I texted him and I was like, hey, are you okay? Like, just want to check in. And I'm not hearing back. And so then 8:45, I check again. He's literally zigzagging through neighborhoods in downtown Denver. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. You know, like every 15 minutes or so, just checking and checking and checking. Finally, about 10 o'clock, I can see he's finally on 225. You know, he's almost home.
Yeah.
And I get a call and it's him. And I'm like, okay, like maybe everything's, at this point, I've received 0 texts back from him. I've told him I'm stressed, I'm worried. And I get a call and he says, hey, I think I drank too much. Can you come pick me up? And I am livid. Like, I am so mad, Danielle. Yeah. Like, I am beyond mad. So I'm like, okay, yeah, like, send me your location. I'll be right there. Get my daughter up out of bed, 10 o'clock at night. Get her in the car. He hasn't sent me his location, so I go to our shared location, find it. I'm like, okay, he's basically 225 and 6th. I get in the car. I actually called a friend and was just like, can I yell at you so I don't yell at him? Mm-hmm. Because I knew with how he was when he drank, I didn't need to be aggressive towards him, which, again, that sucks in hindsight, you know, like that. Not that like being angry is right, but that like I'm stressed about what he might do.
Yeah.
And I'm driving. I pull off on the exit, 6th and 225. You probably know it.
Oh, yes.
And I pull up to the stoplight and I look to my left and I see him getting arrested. There are 4 cop cars and he's getting arrested. And I just told my friend, I have to go. And I hang up, the light turns green. I turn, I pull up behind a cop car. A cop walks up and I'm in shock. He says, are you okay, ma'am? And I said, that's my husband you're arresting right now. And he just looked at me and was like, I'm so sorry. And I think I cried. And he was like, he's gonna be taken in. Like, there's no changing that. He's gonna be taken in. He's getting a DUI. He's like, do you need an escort home?
This is the first day of after your separation.
After my separation, where we talked extensively about how he was an alcoholic and I needed that to change. And that was a big thing for me. And I said, no, I think I'm okay. I've got family I'm going to go stay with, because I knew already, like, I don't want to go be home alone. Mm-hmm. So I called my sister who lived fairly close to us in Aurora. I was like, hey, can I come stay with you guys? She was like, absolutely. I was like, I'll explain it when I get there. And then I called my dad and I said, Dad, like, I'm going to need help figuring this out, but I wanted to give you a heads up. This is what's going on. He said, okay, let me know what you need. Like, we're here. We've got you. And this was after an already pretty tense season with my parents staying with them during my separation. They don't agree with, again, not knowing everything, they don't agree with divorce. And, you know, it was a tense time for our family. So, you know, all of that, they tell me he'll be released tomorrow. He can call you. You can pick him up. His car is going to be impounded because he was so drunk. He was twice the legal limit, but he was so drunk that he blew a tire on his car and didn't realize and drove on it until it had ground down almost to the inner circle of the wheel well. Like, you know how it has like the prongs, like the prongs were almost gone. They caught him because people were calling to report a car on fire. That's how they caught him. Like,
oh my
like,
gosh.
If he had hit any public property, he would have gotten a felon charge. Like, I didn't even know what to do. So they were like, they'll call you, he'll call you. He'll be able to call you when he's out in the morning. You can come get him. And I was like, okay. And they're like, his car's going to go to impound. I was like, okay, we'll take care of it, whatever. And I knew they gave me a general timeline, like he'll probably be out around this time. So I was looking for a call. I didn't sleep that night. My daughter, it's still funny to me. My sister had one of those ottomans that like lifts up and you put blankets inside. She slept in the ottoman with the lid open.
Yeah.
But like that's what they had for her. So I'm on the couch and she's in the ottoman. I was just like, okay, like this is fine. And I never got a call the next day. So I was like, okay, like at some point I was like, all right, well, I'm going to go home, and found out that his phone had died. They had lost his glasses and he had to walk home from the police station. It was like a few miles. And it's so terrible that I'm laughing. But I was like, do we believe in that? I said, I think I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And my parents came. They helped us figure out getting the car from the impound lot. If it was worth it, it wasn't. Basically totaled at that point. My mom was like, honey, are you okay? I was like, I'm in shock, Mom, whatever. And then, everyone left. We were home. I made him sleep in a different bedroom. And the next morning I woke up and I rolled over, and in rolling over, my boobs hurt. And I said, oh no. I was like, this is what it felt like when I was pregnant with Blythe. So I went into the bathroom and I took a pregnancy test and I was pregnant. So 3 days after our separation has ended, I find out I'm pregnant again. And I go downstairs and I tell him like, hey, I'm pregnant. And he was like, we're going to do better. And of course, like he got his DUI. So everyone's like, this is his redemption story. He's going to do better. Like give him grace, have a second chance, And so I was like, okay, let this change you, like with his DUI, he had a breathalyzer, so he couldn't have any alcohol for multiple years. He was on probation. He had to do like random UAs and all that stuff. So I was like, okay, like maybe this will actually change things. So this is in March. Mid-April rolls around and I wake up to him raping me again. And I was like, nope, I'm done. Get out of my house. He paid for it, but because I didn't have a job.
That's where you lived.
Yeah.
That's your home.
But I was like, get out. Like I'm done. Like I'm not doing this. I told him I wanted to get divorced, and he was like, I mean, I don't know what you want me to do. I was like, I don't know. Like this is what it is. Made him leave. Literally sitting on my bed, thinking like I'm gonna divorce him, but I don't know how. I don't really have a job right now. I've now got 2 babies I've got to take care of. Obviously still pregnant with one, but I was like, I need to figure this out. And I get a text from a friend who owns a coffee shop that very well. And she was like, hey, is there any chance you would be interested in a job? And I was like, oh my God. I said, I hear you, God. I got this. Okay. Yeah. And I said, yes, absolutely. They didn't even know I was pregnant at the time. Like they knew nothing. And so I said yes. And I started working at the coffee shop, and was convinced by people to see other church people who had similar stories. And so they were clearly, able to speak into all of this. And they, were like, you just need to date him again. That's going to make everything better. You need to be completely apart, but start dating again, fall in love again.
At this point, were you telling the entirety of the story?
At this point I was, because after his DUI, I just said, F you. Like, this is not okay. Like,
I'm not hiding my truth anymore.
Yeah, I was like, people need to know the full extent of what's going on. And no one was really, like, in my community, there weren't really people who were, like, on my side. Like, they believed me, and they were, on my side, and, like, we support you, and we love you, and all that. But there wasn't really anyone who was like, yeah, get divorced. They were like, just, God is bigger than this, is what I was told over and over again. And it finally reached a point where, like, we had been separated. He was renting a room out of someone's house. I was figuring out how to make, like, bills work. I basically told him, like, this is what's fair. I was paying for all of the utilities and HOA, and he was paying the mortgage. I was like, your expenses are no more with what your rent is, and this is basically what it would break down to if you were paying child support. So, like, that's fine, but, like, I made it work. And then I was due with my second daughter November 10th. And sometime in September, I went into preterm labor, where there was some spotting. My midwife was like, you really need to be on like 90% bed rest at this point. She's like, I know you have a toddler, so you can't really do 100%, but you need to do this. And at this point, like, it had been almost a year of my family, helping me with my daughter and watching and bending over backwards to try to make things work. And they were exhausted.
Yeah.
They didn't sign up to help me raise my kid. And so, like, I didn't really have support, people who could come be with Blythe, and I had to pay for things. And I, kind of had a breakdown one day, and my first husband, he was like, you know what? If you need me to, I'll move back in, but you have to promise to stop talking about the abuse. You have to drop all conversation about divorce. And if you ever bring up either of those things again, I will turn your family against you. I will turn the church against you, and I will take full custody of our children. And I was terrified, Danielle.
Oh my
terrified.
gosh.
I will lose this baby if I'm not on bed rest. And if I'm not on bed rest, that means I'm working so I can pay for the bills. Like, I didn't see
what
another.
Do you do? That's literally the definition of being between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, I didn't know what else to do, so I said okay. So he moved back in. Jude was born on her due date, November 10th. And, from there, it was just kind of like this fog of like, okay, like, now what do we do?
And this was 2018, right?
This was the end of 2018. So going into 2019, I just kind of checked out. Mm-hmm. I was like, you know what? You will suffer as much as you have to keep your children, was kind of my mentality. And with that suffering came a lot of like, how do I make this manageable for myself? So I started using a lot of weed and a lot of alcohol to numb myself to the reality of things. And it didn't really get better. It started taking more and more to be able to
and
feel.
Was he still drinking as well?
He was still drinking, and he was using weed at the same time.
Okay.
So like, definitely do not condone our irresponsible behavior with our children in the house. There were a lot of nights where we were both completely blitzed. Like, wouldn't have been able to operate a car if our house caught on fire. Was very, very, very unsafe.
Survival.
Yeah. And at that same time, there was a lot of, like, it was right around this time that all the Brett Kavanaugh stuff came out. And that was really, do you remember this?
I don't. I remember the name, but can you refresh my memory?
So he's the, like, Supreme Justice or something like that. Like, he's like literally the most powerful man in the U.S.
Okay.
And as he was up for election in that, I think it's an election, I was very, like, it's all very blurry, but I remember he was accused of assaulting a woman, in his college years, and people were defending him, and it was really triggering because she was like, they were like, why wouldn't you talk about it before? And so it was all these things of like, this is my reality where I'm not talking about this, and what happens if I ever need to, if he's faced with this really powerful position, it was just really hard. And so I had told my first husband, I said, you know what, you need to sleep in a different room. I can't be around you right now. At that point, I had been so numbed out. I was like, whatever you want is fine, I guess, and he was kind of giving me space, and I plummeted, like, after using for as many months as I had, to the extent that I had, dealing with what I now recognize was postpartum depression on top of everything else, and then being triggered by this person. Like, I just didn't see the point anymore. And I started thinking about, like, what kind of life am I teaching my children to have by doing this? And so I sat down for, I think it was a good 3 days, and he had no idea what was going on, because I just said I needed space because of the Brett Kavanaugh stuff, but I was dissecting all of my options. I was reading my old journals from our separation in 2018, and I finally realized my choices, my realistic choices, were to divorce him and risk losing everything that I knew and loved, or killing myself and making it a much easier explanation for my children. So that was a big thing, where I never wanted to have to explain to my children why I left their dad. And it's something I still navigate to this day. They ask me regularly, like, what happened? And, they get very, very minimal details. But I was like, it's easier for a kid to process that their mom died when they were little. Because, Jude was barely over a year at this point. She was 15 months old. And Blythe that would make her 3. So I was like, they don't, they're not really going to have a ton of strong memories of this, versus them needing to grapple with the fact that their dad had so intensely abused their mom. when they were little. And so I made the decision to take my life. We had a bottle of Excedrin in our house, and I had a glass of whiskey, and I took the rest of the bottle, and then texted my husband, and I said, hey, you can come up whenever you want. You can sleep in the room tonight. Not fully thinking about what all of that meant. But at this point, like, I had already had most of a bottle of wine and about 6 ounces of whiskey on an empty stomach. I wasn't eating again, plus whatever amount of Excedrin I had just downed. And he walked into the room. I'm like, given all of that, like, I was just on the bed, like, completely out of it. But I remember, like, seeing his eyes, and he just walked towards me and started raping me. And I,
Are you
like,
serious?
I remember, and I'm, again, so sorry this is graphic, but, like, I remember being face down on the bed, just saying no over and over and over again. Like, this was not a passed out complicit thing. Like, I was saying no, and he didn't stop until I forced my way up so that I could vomit because of everything I had just taken. And I remember he backed up and he looked at me and he said, what the fuck did you do? And I think I just looked at him. From there, like, memories get pretty choppy. Yeah. I remember he threw me in the shower because I was just vomiting so profusely, like, threw me in the shower. I didn't have any pants on. I just had a shirt on. And I remember the water spraying me in the face. I was kind of choking on it. And then I remember hearing him call the paramedics. You know, I think my wife did something. I need someone to come help. I need help. Our kids are asleep at this point. This is, you know, after 10 o'clock at night. And I remember I was admitted into the hospital right after midnight on February 21st.
Okay, so you were admitted. Do you remember that moment?
I do. It's not like a definitive, like, oh, I remember I was admitted right in this moment, but I remember the feeling of them transferring me from, like, the ambulance bed to the ER bed. And that experience in and of itself, like, I really think our medical system needs to do better.
Yes.
The paramedics were amazing. I vividly remember it wasn't until probably about 2 a.m. that I stopped begging them to stop doing anything and just letting me die. But I remember the paramedic, like, looking at me and, like, again, like, I had OD'd so bad, Danielle.
Yeah.
And so I could not stop vomiting. And I remember in the ambulance, like, I was strapped down, but I had, like, managed to roll over and I vomited right on this lovely paramedic's shoes.
I'm sure they're used to it.
Yeah, no, he looked at me and he said, don't you worry about it. These shoes don't matter, but you do, Leah, and you're going to be okay. We're going to make sure you're okay. And, like, absolutely amazing. Like, I wish I could find the people who made a difference in that situation. But I was in the ER for a while. Like, there were a couple of instances that were really awful with the medical personnel. You know, I remember, again, vomiting, and a lady walked in and gave me, like, one of the vomit bags, you know, and she, like, held it out to me. And then I went to the rope and she dropped it and said, I'm not going to hold that for you. You do that. And I was just like, I was like, I don't understand right now.
Yeah.
You know, and then another woman kindly came in, another nurse sat with me. You have kids. Didn't you think about them? You have to think about your kids. And I was like, lady, you have no idea how much I thought about my kids.
Wow.
Like, you have no idea what's going on. Like, and I had told them, like, in the intake, they're like, Leah, like, what's going on? And I talked about how my husband hurt me and, you know, all these things. But then, you know, a nurse came in and she looked at me and, like, again, I had a crop top t-shirt on when I was brought in, completely naked from there down, but then my shirt was soaked in vomit, so they cut that off. So I'm just kind of, like, naked in a bed, but I'm on suicide watch, obviously, which means that someone has to be with me at all times or have eyes on me at least. And my room smelled bad because I was vomiting. Right. And the nurse didn't want to be in there, so she had rolled my bed into the doorway so she could see me from the nurse's station. But I was going through, I mean, I had OD'd, I think like the combination of alcohol and the medication like had triggered, I think it was like 5 or 6 different ODs at the time, but one of them was caffeine. So my heart rate, resting heart rate, Danielle, was between 160 and 180.
So it probably felt like you were also having a heart attack.
Yeah, having a heart attack,
else.
anxiety attacks. I was having heat flashes, so I kept throwing the blankets off and then was completely exposed in the ER.
Yeah.
But I remember a nurse came in, saw that, was like, I'm going to get you a robe. I'm going to get you clean blankets because all my blankets were cold and soaked. She pulled the ponytail out of her own hair to pull my hair out of my face so I could get a breath of fresh air. And so like I remember those things, like again, very choppy. Yeah. I remember I didn't have my glasses, I didn't have my phone, because I was on whatever watch. Right. And I was like, I just need something to pass the time. They put on SpongeBob SquarePants on the little ER TV.
That sounds terrible.
It was so great. I loved it.
Yeah.
And then pretty much after my heart rate stabilized, and by stabilized it went to 140 resting, they admitted me into a room and not just the ER. And from there it was kind of this blur. My parents were out of the country when this happened. They were in Israel, and my first husband and my daughters and my grandmother all came in around 8 a.m. that morning, so I was still very out of it. And it's the first moment I remember actually regretting anything, because both of the girls had been completely asleep this whole time. I was told they didn't wake up when the ambulance or the paramedics were there. Like, they stayed asleep. They just heard that mom was gone in the morning. And my older daughter, Blythe, who is 3.5 at this point, walks into my hospital room, puts both of her hands on like my leg under the blankets, and looks at me and says, Mom, are you still gonna die? And I just I was like, I don't know how. No one told her anything, but she knew. And I instantly regretted it. I knew. I was like, that was not the right thing. And so in that moment, I knew, like, I'm going to file for divorce.
Hey, friends. Jumping in here to say that this is where we're going to end for today. So please join us on the next episode to hear the rest of Leah's powerful story. Thanks for tuning in to the Created Worthy podcast. If anything in today's show resonated with you, can you do me a huge favor and go leave a 5-star review? This helps more listeners find the show, and it also expands the impact, messages, and stories that are shared here. All the links and guest information are in the show notes. If you're on social media, I want to personally invite you to continue the conversations about these important topics that we're talking about. You can find Created Worthy on both Instagram and Facebook by just typing in Created Worthy Podcast. Can't wait to talk to you soon, friend. And don't forget, you are created worthy.